dying to ask you this question because I agree. Ideally, we have a merit-based system, right? But you also have to kind of take a step back and look at our cultural landscape and the kind of behavior that tends to get rewarded that infuriates me. And I think a prime example is actually someone who came on your show, that Cash Me Outside chick, right? That woman, she's a multi-millionaire now. Multi-millionaire, and she was brought on your show by her mother because of her bad behavior. And her bad behavior became a national sensation. And then she went off to make a lot of money off of her whole persona and everything. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, what can we do to change the culture so bad behavior doesn't get rewarded?
Well, you read the book, and I wrote it down. It's one of the most fundamental principles. I put it in the book. Number 3, don't reward bad behavior or support conduct that you don't value.
So we're here on the Young Turks again today, and their guest is Dr. Phil. Now, I don't know much about Dr. Phil. I never watched his show. I've seen some clips over the years, of course. And from what I gather, as we know, that the Young Turks call themselves progressives. Although Anna Kasparian, as we've seen over the recent months and maybe the past year or so, seems to be breaking out of the libtard progressive nonsense. She's like the caterpillar has grown wings inside a chrysalis, and she's starting to break out. But anyway, they got Dr. Phil on, who I think is probably more right of center. But he seems like a pretty straightforward kind of guy to me, from what I know. In any case, he just makes a very obvious good point. Anybody who's a parent, for example, like me, I've got four kids. You do not reward bad behavior. It's just basic common sense. It's a fundamental of parenting, but of course it works in other relationships too. But Anna Kasparian was bemoaning the fact that the Cash Me Outside girl, who I've vaguely heard of, basically made a career out of bad behavior. She first appeared on Dr. Phil's show years ago, apparently, and parlayed that into millions of dollars as a career. But this is just a sign of the times we live in. I hate to say it, but we are living in an attention economy. And who gets attention? Well, the naughty child gets attention. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. And it's not just in parent-child relationships. It's not just in the classroom, for example, but it's across our society as a whole. It's in politics. It's in the real world, and this is absolute nonsense. People, but this is it for better or for worse. And of course, in America, looking at America from outside, from my perspective in Europe, America. I love the country. I was born and raised in America, but I've lived in Europe for many years now. And it's an interesting country because it's a country of extremes, and extremes in all directions, in good ways and in bad ways. And it just takes everything to the extreme. And this is one way. But the problem is, from my point of view, what happens in America, especially the bad things I often see, they end up coming to Europe with a bit of a delay, but they end up here too. So anyway, let's see what the Young Turks have to say, if they're going to go off on one of their progressive rants, especially Cenk, what he's like.
That's one of the most fundamental principles of psychology. You don't reward bad behavior, because the behavior you reward, you're going to see again and again and again. You withhold reward, or you introduce a negative to that person, they're going to stop doing that. It's true with rats. You put a rat in a cage and they push a lever and get a food pellet. You know what? They're going to push that lever again. They push a lever and get shocked. They're going to, don't push that lever.
But we keep giving the pellets to the bad people. That's my point, right?
That's the whole point. We do.
And it's in every facet of American life. It's not just in pop culture or entertainment. It's also in our political system. I think a lot of bad behavior gets rewarded in our political system as well.
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying is when I'm saying we need to have this middle 70% of the country who has an attitude of live and let live, and they just kind of silent, let things roll along. I think we need to wake those folks up and say, hey, you know what? Whatever you believe, you need to start speaking out. You need to start saying what you really believe. I hear all of these folks saying, vote, just get out and vote. I think that's a bad piece of advice.
Really? Why?
Because you don't want to just vote. You want to make an informed vote.
Agreed with you on that, yeah.
Don't just...
Now, this is an interesting point that Dr. Phil's making. He's almost heading towards a kind of a hot take, but I know he's not going to say the hot take I have in mind. But he's right, of course. Yeah, just getting out and voting. Yeah, voting is great. We all have the right to vote. But, of course, we should all be making an informed vote. But is that what really happens? I mean, in the real world, is that what happens? No, not really. And, you know, let's face it, there is a reason why voting was a very limited right for much of America's history, certainly from the very beginning, yeah. It was limited, historically, to people who had a direct stake in the country. So, you know, voting even today is still limited to some extent. I believe felons can't vote, but that might depend on the state. In the United States, you'll have to let me know in the comments. You know, and maybe, I think maybe they only lose the right to vote while they're actually incarcerated. I don't know. I mean, you know, every state probably has different rules. I don't know if there's a federal law on that. But if I had my way, now I will give a hot take here. I would immediately restrict the right to vote. Immediately. What would I restrict? And the first thing I would restrict, of course, illegals shouldn't be allowed to vote, or it shouldn't even be possible for them to accidentally vote. So the American voting system seems like a big mess to me, but that's another thing. I don't even think immigrants should ever be allowed to vote. And I say that as an immigrant. I am an immigrant to this European country I live in. You know, I'm a naturalized citizen here. I don't think I should be allowed to vote here. I think if you go and, you know, emigrate to another country, I don't think, you know, that country has welcomed you, and it is your job to make a go of it and to succeed in that country and to pay into the system and all that. But I don't think you should ever be able to vote. Maybe your children, if your children are born there, then okay, fair enough. But I don't think immigrants to a country should ever be allowed to vote. I know I've said that to a few people, and they all think it's crazy. I don't think it's crazy at all. I think you know, people take time, who they come from different parts of the world to a country. They don't have the background, the social and cultural background and history of their new host country. So I just don't think they should be able to vote. Secondly, I certainly don't think people in jail should be able to vote. I don't think anybody who's on the public dime should be able to vote. If you are taking from the welfare system in any way, receiving benefits, or if you're in jail, if you're in some way dependent on the state, I don't think you should be allowed to vote. You should be a net contributor to the society you're in. Sorry, it's just the way it is. If other people have to take care of you, then, and you can't take care of yourself, you are not making a net contribution to society. Sorry. And you shouldn't be able to vote, at least for that period. I mean, if you get out of that situation, fantastic. You work your way out, you figure a way out. Yeah, then you can, you know, get your right back. Yeah, I'm hardcore when it comes to this thing. So to me, that's like a few very easy restrictions on voting, and I think that would make a big difference. Another one is the age. I think 18 is much too young to vote. I don't care. You know, the argument is always, oh, you know, if you're old enough to join the army and go get killed for your country, you're old enough to vote. Yeah, I understand that argument, but no. Again, I think the voting age should be much, much higher, unless it's offset by some sort of massive contribution to the country. I mean, that's arguable. I'm less. You know, I feel less strongly about that, but I still think 18 is too young. Anyway, let's carry on and see where this goes.
vote. Don't just say, oh, go get out there and go hit the lever. And I've been beating the drum that you need to be an informed voter, and you need to vote the ticket from the bottom up, not the top down. If you really understand how this works, your life is impacted by local offices as well.
Sure is.
If you're in the park and there's a dog that attacks the lady that lives down the street who's got her child in a stroller, you know what? You need to find out if that dog catcher, I guess they call them animal control now.
They do, yeah.
If that person is allowing dogs to be roaming around and attacking children, find out, was that a one-off, or is that person not doing their job? Is he or she not doing their job? And if they're not, then don't vote for them. If you've got judges who aren't enforcing the law fairly, equitably, and doing it in a way you value, then don't vote for that judge. If that DA's not doing their job, if you think they're being too heavy-handed, then don't vote for them. If you think they're not enforcing the law enough, then don't vote. Find out who in your world is behaving a way that you hold near and dear to your heart, and vote, and do that from the bottom up. That's where your life is impacted.
I mean, I honestly didn't really, that message didn't really resonate with me until about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Because local politics has changed so much where we live.
Yeah, Dr. Phil made an excellent point there. In fact, it's local politics, that's what really makes a difference in most people's lives. National politics, much less so. I mean, it's important too, of course. And especially in the United States, because of the way the United States is set up with individual states, which each have far more powers than your typical European country. Yes, in Western Europe, the countries are typically divided into, states or provinces or regions, departments, whatever they call them. But the power is much more centralized, and the central government has most of the power. And of course, the whole point of the United States originally at its creation was that the states had the vast majority of power, and the federal government had very, very limited powers. Now, over the last couple centuries, the powers of the federal government have metastasized and morphed into a grotesque hobgoblin and mishmash of excessive powers that I think should be scaled back dramatically. But that's another issue. Dr. Phil makes a very good point. There's a lot, and especially in the States, you can vote for a lot of local people, your local sheriff, your school board superintendent, school district superintendents, and I guess all that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of stuff that can really make a difference in your local life, in the life of your local community.
So you're right about that.
Well, Obama said that really well. Well, I saw him talk about it one time, and he said it better than I did, but he really talked to people about making informed votes and voting from the bottom of the ticket up. I thought he made a good point.
Yeah, I agree.
So, but you said politics you're not that into, you care more about culture, but Dr. Phil, politics is the culture in a lot of ways, and the culture is the politics, right? So I wish we didn't have the culture wars that we have, but we do, and oftentimes they're used to distract us. So while the politicians then serve their donors, et cetera. But so, for example, you said government is too big, but too big how, right? So for example, is the government too big when it says you can't get an abortion? Because that's the government getting between a woman and her doctor and saying, I'm gonna make the most personal decision of your lifetime for you. Big government's gonna do that. The people who say that they're for small government support that decision, and that doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't, but I say it this way. I've dealt for 20 plus years on the air and 45 years in my professional career with people that oftentimes make, I think, a huge mistake of inviting the government into their lives. Like I have people come on and they got a marital situation that's falling apart, they have children, they have a custody dispute, and one or both of them say, well, we'll just go to court and let them decide. And I go, oh, no, you don't want to do that. You don't want to invite the government into your private life if you can keep from it. You need to go sit down and try to resolve this. Get a private mediator if you have to. But that judge up there, he or she is not King Solomon. And they're just human beings. And in particular, they're not trained in this particular area. So when I say government's too big, we are to blame. We invite government into our lives too much.
Yeah, he makes a good point. Let's get back to what Cenk said, which of course was the usual nonsensical pro-abortion argument, where he tries to conflate, he tries to run a gotcha on you. If I've seen him do this before in other videos where he says, well, you right-wingers, you Republicans, you're the party of small government, right? Right. Well, then what about the government forcing, a person not to have an abortion or whatever? Well, that's obviously not the issue with abortion, Cenk. You're being extremely disingenuous to even put it in those terms. It's ridiculous. Now, respect to Dr. Phil, he just neatly sidestepped Cenk's ridiculous argument there, and I'm shocked that Cenk hasn't started losing his mind. He usually does at this sort of point. But Dr. Phil just went on with his general argument that you do not want to invite more government into your life. It just cannot do any good. The founders understood that, government is necessary. It's necessary evil. You could put it, if you want to put it that way. I don't think it's an evil, but yeah, it is necessary. People organize in hierarchies. They organize themselves. Communities organize themselves to get things done. And as they get bigger, and you have bigger, individual communities grow into cities and states and all that kind of thing in a country. Yeah, you need levels. You need government, obviously, of some kind. And the founders were well aware of all the pitfalls, the advantages and disadvantages of all the different kinds of government, and the advantages and disadvantages of big government in particular. They went out of their way to set up the system that they set up. But of course, that system has become grossly corrupted and has degenerated over in the last 2 centuries. And it is that, if the founders came back today, they would just burn the whole thing down. I have no doubt about it. But let's leave it there for now. And I hope if you guys have anything to say, what did you think about the overall tone of this rather respectful conversation on the Young Turks? And let me know what you think in the comments. As usual, I would ask you to like and subscribe if you like this kind of stuff, because it really helps me make more videos and grow the channel so I can keep on doing what I'm doing.